Hi, welcome to the Global Current.
Your window to the world.
I'm Will Cuervo.
And I'm Blabba Hater.
Up next, Valeria Gomez Palacios speaks about the fairness in past Nicaraguan elections.
The sound of gunfire and the smell of powder greet every citizen in Nicaragua. Protests, marches, fight, and small declarations of war and hate salute those that dare to walk the streets. The reason for the violence? The municipal elections held on November 4th. The fundamental base of democracy is the public will of the people expressed through the ballot box. Yet instead of bringing a joyful celebration, it's the reason and mourn the death of Nicaragua's democracy. Elections in Nicaragua have never been considered free or fair. Throughout its history, holding elections became a common trend in its liberal democracy as a way to appease the masses and give the illusions that the leaders are democratically elected. So when a country has been denied the right to vote for as long as it has existed, why has this election been especially enraging? The Sandinista ruling party nominating dead officials as candidates is a blatant mockery to the intelligence of its citizens and a slap in the face to any trace of democracy still left in this country. The fact that they can nominate dead officials to office and set up voting centers that allow people to vote for them just shows how much the government disregards democracy, disregards its citizens, and above all, the amount of power the current government holds in order to get away with such an act without consequences. The dilemma the Nicaraguan faced was whether to vote or not to vote. Many opposition leaders called for a wide abstention from voting. What was the point? Let the dead vote for the dead, and in fact they did. In the past, many citizens have found their deceased relatives have somehow managed to vote from the Sandinista ruling party. If you're not a registered member of the Sandinista party, then your dead relative has more of a chance to vote than you do. Quote, nearly 20% of the population is in legal limbo. They don't exist on the active voter registry or on the passive voter registry, so where are they? Demanded the director of the Institute for Development and Democracy, Mauricio Zuniga. Despite the call to abstentions, there were some that argued that it was their civil duty to go out and vote. Yet the majority still felt that abstention was the only way to demonstrate their disdain towards the party. They argued that there would not have been a call for abstention if the electoral system was actually independent and honest, or if the elections were transparent, clean, and if there was an actual person competing in them. The opposition has declared an electoral silence with a campaign that was born mute with anonymous candidates, no proposals, with empty ballots, and the majority of the candidates are dead. According to Doña Maria Tellez, an outspoken opposition leader, the fraud has been committed not because the magistrates from the political parties sell out and have not tried to defend the right to vote. Many of them have been threatened and beaten in the past. The fraud has been committed because Orteguismo, or those who support Daniel Ortega, control the entire electoral system. Quote, in 2008, they stole the elections through the falsification, and again in 2011, he stole the elections by falsifying votes and altering the arithmetic vote counting municipality by municipality, an act so scandalous that the numbers were never published because they never added up. What happened Sunday, like in 2008 and in 2011, is not the magistrate's fault, nor is it the fault of those who voted or did not vote. The blame lies in the hand of those who support Ortega. Our responsibility as citizens is to reject the fraud. We need to organize and mobilize to achieve real elections. It is everyone's responsibility to oppose the rise of power, fraud, corruption, and the rampant impunity of the Nicaraguan institutions. Quote, the message Nicaraguans want to send with their abstention from this election is that they want free elections, democratic parties, and real proposals. The abstention and annulment of votes must send the message to the ruling party that they are declaring the current electoral system, with all its fictitious protagonists, dead. Abstention represents a form of rebellion, not apathy or indifference. When asked about how they felt about the current elections, Claudia Gomez, a Nicaraguan citizen, replied, what election? Which candidates? When did they present their programs? By abstaining to vote, they are declaring the system corrupt and done with. President Daniel Ortega might have lost his compassion to corruption and his backbone to excessive power, becoming what he once vowed to destroy. Yet he has not destroyed Nicaragua's will for democracy. A year ago, the opposition took the street with the slogan, let your mother re-elect you. To now, they say, the time to topple the regime came a long time ago. Our Arab Spring is coming. Valeria Gomez Palacios, the Global Current.
Up next, Olivia Coulson speaks about the West African nations reached consensus regarding Mali intervention.
West African military officials have reached a consensus for the conduct of a regional military intervention in Mali. Earlier this week, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, came together to propose a military plan to expel Islamist extremists in northern Mali, who have brutally occupied the northern half of the country for 7 months. Before the new plan is implemented, it must be approved by the heads of states of member nations of ECOWAS, as well as the African Union. If it passes scrutiny at those levels, it can then be presented to the UN Security Council on November 26 for approval. Specific details of the plan, such as the size of the force, financial support sources, and degree of participation by individual nations, have yet to be released. The ECOWAS plan is the result of increasing concern and dialogue on the international level. The plan is a reaction to the influx of Islamist extremist groups into northern Mali, which in turn came on the heels of a March military coup which plunged the nation into political chaos. France has been a particularly vocal advocate in the international community, helping to lead the charge to resolve the conflict in its former colony. The French government has promised assistance to any intervention staged by ECOWAS with logistics and intelligence, but not troops on the ground. Late last month, French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius explained the impetus for international action.
There are terrorists from different groups. They have a lot of weapons, some of which came from Libya, and money from hostage-taking and from drug trafficking. These terrorists are a threat, not just for Malians through their use of murder, rape and pillaging, but also to neighbouring countries in the whole of Africa.
The terrorists in northern Mali include members of 4 different organizations. The Tuareg rebels, an ethnic minority, seized control shortly after the military coup and ousted President Amadou Touré from office. They have declared independence in their northern region of control, which they called Azawad. The Tuaregs are joined in Mali by members of the global terror network Al-Qaeda, as well as 2 smaller groups known as Ansar Dine and the Movement for Onessus and Jihad in West Africa. Together, the extremists have taken control of the main cities of Timbuktu, Gao, and Kindle, and seek to impose Islamic Sharia law throughout Mali. The growth of these Islamic extremists has proved troubling for world leaders, especially as hundreds of French and African citizens traveled to Mali to join the jihad. Quote, "Free democratic states cannot accept international terrorism gaining a safe refuge in the north of the country," German Chancellor Angela Merkel said at the German military conference near Berlin. Indeed, the ECOWAS proposal for the action seems to bring with it an imminent change in Mali. The same day ECOWAS drafted their plan for intervention, the extremist group Ansar Dine announced that it was prepared to lay down its arms and begin negotiations. Many hope that this new plan will help Mali return to a stable state. This has been Heidi Erpson for Olivia Colson, The Global Current.
Executive producer Qmars Ahmed speaks about the latest pretrial hearing in the case against alleged 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
On October 20th, the latest pretrial hearing in the case against alleged 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 4 other conspirators concluded. The hearing lasted for 5 days and dealt with motions that would govern the exact procedure of how the trial before a military tribunal will unfold. The motions dealt with everything from the clothes the defendants would be allowed to wear to the workplace conditions of the attorneys. If anything, these 5 days have shown just how unique this trial is in American legal history. Seemingly, every motion has fundamental constitutional questions. Should Khalid Sheikh Mohammed be allowed to wear a camouflage vest during the trials? His lawyers say yes. He wore them when he was a member of the Mujahideen fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan in the 1980s. They also say that not allowing him to wear such a vest might implicitly create a presumption of guilt. The United States government, on the other hand, says that the military-looking clothes undermines their position on the status of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed as an unlawful belligerent. Uniforms belong to lawful enemy combatants who are afforded protections under the Geneva Convention. The court ruled in favor of the defendants. There were a couple of motions that go to the core of constitutional rights and will have far-reaching ramifications. The United States government asked the judge for permission to censor the testimony of the defendants. This would be done by sequestering reporters behind a soundproof window and imposing a 40-second delay on the audio of the proceedings so that the audio could be edited before it reached reporters' ears. Even more foreign to the American conception of judicial free speech is what the United States government calls, quote, presumptive classification. Essentially, this preemptively classifies any and all discussion of what the CIA did to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed while he was in their custody. This ban extends to the defendant's testimony. This means that a man who stands accused of a crime, for which he could receive the death penalty, cannot discuss the methods by which his interrogators extracted information that could lead to his execution. He cannot discuss the methods, the places, the timeline, nothing. This ban even extends to the attorney-client relationship. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's own attorney, David Levin, said in a recent interview with the Miami Herald that the ban is so broad-sweeping that he cannot discuss his client's philosophies even, much less what the CIA did to him while in custody. The attorneys are not allowed to say what occurs during their meetings with their clients. In another interview, Cheryl Borman, attorney for another one of the defendants, said, quote, "Everything is presumptively top secret. So if my client had a tuna fish sandwich for lunch, I couldn't tell you that." End quote. The government argues that this classification is necessary to protect the intelligence gathering network and techniques of the CIA, and that to do otherwise would undermine their efforts, creating an unnecessary national security risk. The ACLU calls this argument in censorship, quote, Orwellian. Too often, when discussing law, we are unable to divorce ourselves from our emotions. It is far too easy to disregard the positions of the defendant in this case. This is a man who has claimed that he planned every detail of the 9/11 attacks, advised the attackers in the World Trade Center bombing, and brags that he was the one who beheaded journalist Daniel Pearl in 2002. There are those who argue that such a person does not even deserve a trial. It is hard to argue where their hearts are, but since the Nuremberg trials, this country has set out to be governed by the principles of justice and the fair rule of law. That even the most evil men deserve the most fair of trials. That no matter a man's guilt, we have to first assume innocence, and that no matter his actions, there are certain situations we cannot put any human being in. Imagine you were accused of a crime. Guilty or not, just imagine you were accused. You are in custody, and no one on the planet, except for your captors, knows where you are. Your interrogators use traditional methods at first, but not liking your answers, they move to enhanced techniques. To paraphrase David Levin, imagine that you were the only witness to your own torture, and you could never speak a word about it to anyone. We know for a fact that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was waterboarded at least 183 times. Now, we will never know any other fact about those interrogations. This is the paradox that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed finds himself in. This is the paradox the United States justice system finds itself in. This is a paradox that must be resolved, not for the sake of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, but for the sake of the justice system in this country. This is the point where the dueling interests of freedom and security intersect, one of the most tangible examples of a debate that has been part of this country since 9/11. There are no easy answers for such a complex issue, but the direction we take at this intersection will come to define this era in American judicial history. For the Global Current, I'm Q Mars Ahmed.
Up next, staff member Anthony DeFlorio speaks about the Silvio Berlusconi trial.
As disgraced former leader Silvio Berlusconi is found guilty of tax evasion, Italy passes an anti-corruption law with intent to bring transparency and accountability back to the Italian political scene. However, this sudden overhaul of decades of backdoor dealings and lucrative political practices begs the question, why now? It's without a doubt a political sentence, the way so many other trials invented against me have been political, Mr. Berlusconi said after the Friday ruling, one which saw the former prime minister convicted of tax fraud and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Berlusconi, who served as leader of the Italian state 3 times between 1994 and 2011, was the longest-serving post-war prime minister of Italy. The ruling handed out on Friday was Mr. Berlusconi's 4th lower court conviction, a not-so-shocking event for many Italians after years in which his personal legal battles often eclipsed the work of his government. With this media tycoon turned politician now sequestered from the Italian political arena, the Italian parliament, in accordance with the technocratic Monti administration, has passed a new anti-corruption law meant to crack down on Berlusconi-like figures whose abuses of power and corrupt political practices plague the democratic process and negatively impact the Italian economy. The new law, which was passed on October 30th, increases prison sentences for public officials and was made a confidence motion, which curtails debate and ends voting on individual amendments in the Monti administration in order to speed up its approval by both houses of parliament. Prime Minister Mario Monti, who replaced Berlusconi in November 2011, is clearly looking to enhance the image and integrity of the Italian political realm. However, it is quite a lofty goal considering the reputation of his predecessor and the magnitude and scope of corruption which has existed in the Italian government for a number of decades. The passing of this anti-corruption law comes at a time when the European Union and the overall ominous-looking future of the Eurozone depends heavily on the actions of its debt-ridden member, Italy included, to implement budget cuts in conjunction with the harsher economic austerity measures. A new report by the Italian Audit Court revealed that government corruption drains 60 billion euros out of public coffers a year, highlighting the necessity of the measures. The gap between the Italian government's revenues and spending currently lands at 87 billion euros. That deficit could be nearly accounted for by curtailing the cost of corruption. In addition to imposing heavier sentences on public officials found guilty of demanding bribes, abusing the power of office, or peddling influence, the new law will also target corruption in the private sector. Under these laws, a larger number of individuals can be held accountable for criminal actions within any given company. The current Monti technocracy is playing a pivotal role in guiding Italy through the perilous economic crisis it faces. But as current Italian Senator Emma Bonino believes, the nation requires a holistic reform in the democratic process, stating the party system is the major contributor to the decay of effective and accountable governance. Anthony DeFlorio, The Global Current.
Coming up next, Bilal Bahadur speaks about the Puerto Rican referendum for statehood.
While most of the world had its eye on the American presidential election earlier this week, residents of Puerto Rico made some waves of their own. During Tuesday's elections, which included a referendum to gauge public opinion on the relationship with the United States, a plurality of Puerto Rican voters supported a move towards statehood. The vote was met with mixed responses by parties within Puerto Rico. Jubilant members of the Puerto Rico's pro-statehood party claim the referendum results are the strongest sign yet that the Caribbean island, legally as a U.S. territory, is well on its way to overcoming its second-class status, claiming that Tuesday's results represent the first time in 45 years that Puerto Ricans have voted for statehood.
Because when I ran for president, I promised to include Puerto Rico, not just on my itinerary, but also in my vision of where our country needs to go. And I'm proud to say that we've kept that promise too. First of all, we've addressed the question of political status. In March, a report from our Presidential Task Force on Puerto Rican status provided a meaningful way forward on this question so that the residents of the island can determine their own future.
Though President Obama confirmed he would respect the will of the Puerto Rican people, the referendum was non-binding. This leads most officials to consider the recent vote to be a little more as a barometer of public opinion rather than an expression of popular will. Despite the claims on the contrary, it is not totally clear on what Tuesday's referendum will mean for the future of U.S.-Puerto Rican relations. The results are far from clear-cut. Puerto Ricans voted on a two-stage referendum. Voters were first asked if they were satisfied with Puerto Rico's current status vis-a-vis the United States, or whether they prefer to change the current status. Regardless of how voters responded to the first question, they were allowed to answer a second question, which gave them an opportunity to vote on three potential options for a change. Of those who chose to answer the second question, 61% voted for statehood with the United States, 33% voted for sovereign free association, which would grant more autonomy to Puerto Rico, and another 5% voted for outright independence. While pro-statehood groups welcome, the meaning of the results is disputed by other groups. Only about 1.3 voters answered the second question of the referendum, meaning somewhere around 500,000 voters left the question blank. Puerto Rico's population is about 4 million people. Ultimately, the results of the Puerto Rico vote demonstrate the hotly debated and deeply polarizing public debate in Puerto Rico. In an interview with Democracy Now!, New York Daily News columnist Juan Gonzalez noted that Puerto Rico is, quote, still grappling with its status, and this referendum is another step along the road, but it is not clear-cut as the press releases are setting it out to be, end quote. According to at least one Associated Press report, Puerto Rico's pro-statehood resident commissioner, Pierre Luisi, announced that, quote, the ball is now in Congress's court, and Congress will have to react to this result, end quote. Though pro-statehood groups are likely overplaying the significance of the vote, it remains true that in all current or future votes on the Puerto Rico statehood, any final decision regarding statehood status remains up to the U.S. Congress. Skeptics have pointed out that Washington, D.C. has long sought statehood status within the United States and has so far been unsuccessful, further demonstrating that even if a majority supporting Puerto Rican statehood emerges, achieving such a status is nothing to take for granted. Today I'm here with freshman student Daniel Cruz. Daniel was born and raised in Puerto Rico. He has been studying Puerto Rico naturally for a while. So Danny, tell me, what happened in the Puerto Rico elections this past Tuesday?
Well, there was two parts to the Puerto Rican elections. First of all, the incumbent governor, Luis Fortuño, which is part of the new Progressive Party, which favors statehood, lost popular Democratic candidate Alejandro Garcia Padilla. And the second part of the election was a referendum, which had two parts as well, which are divided into if the Puerto Rican people were content with the current territorial status. On that question, 50% of the voters said no. Keep in mind that if you voted here, you weren't necessarily against the current status of Puerto Rico, which is a Commonwealth. You simply weren't satisfied with the current version of the Commonwealth. The second part of the referendum was a question regarding which status do you prefer. The choices were statehood, a sovereign, free associated state, or independence. In the polls, statehood prevailed 61.5%, the sovereign, free associated state 33.3%, and independence 5.5%. Although this is a non-binding resolution, it has a lot of importance because it unites the opinions of the Puerto Rican people. That 61.5% who voted for statehood was not the majority because over 470,000 voters intentionally left the second question blank. It just basically means that people did not make up their mind or were not sure what was the best option for Puerto Rico at that time, or basically they just did not want to change it as a whole. They were not certain.
What impact does this have on the United States' relations with Puerto Rico?
Almost none, 0 to none. This, since it's not binding, it will be taken to Congress, but in order for it to be approved, it needs to be approved 2/3 of a majority. And this will mean that Puerto Rico would gain 2 Senate seats and 5 to 6 House of Representative seats, which will be probably taken from big states like California or Texas.
In your opinion, do you favor statehood for Puerto Rico, or do you want it to be what it is right now?
At the moment, it's too uncertain to say. Puerto Rico isn't self-dependent enough to make a decision on its current state. It should first be able to self-sustain itself without having such a big debt and a 13% unemployment rate. Honestly, I would prefer Puerto Rico to either be a sovereign free associated state or independent. Basically because, first of all, Puerto Ricans' native tongue is Spanish, and if it would be incorporated into the United States, it would have to change into English, which would damage not only communication, but the culture in itself.
So what are the main political factors in this referendum, and what are their ideologies regarding the referendum?
There's 3 sides. The New Progressive Party wants statehood. The Sovereign Free Associated State Party, which is the Popular Democratic Party, wants it to stay the same but have more or less a sovereignty while still being associated with the United States. And the Independence Party, which has lost a lot of power and ground. So basically, in Puerto Rico, the 2 political parties that have the most impact are the Popular Democratic Party and the New Progressive Party, and both of them have been trying vigorously to maintain or get the United States to look at the current status as a pending problem towards the progress and vitality of Puerto Rico as a state.
So what are the demographics of the supporters with either the independent statehood or the actual statehood with the United States?
The country is divided on this question, but there is a tendency by young people to want it to be either independent or a sovereign state, unless they're being swayed by their family's political affiliations. A lot of kids these days are just going by what their parents tell them and not actually getting informed about the facts, the percentages of what's going on, how would this affect and how would this react. More wealthy people approve the New Progressive Party, and recently the New Progressive Party has been giving a lot of benefits towards lower class. The New Progressive Party has been helping them out in such a way that they feel obliged to vote for them, while historically the middle class has been voting for the Popular Democratic Party. But recently there has been more division, more fragments of different religious groups voting for one party or another. So it would be going into demographics and very specific, and it tends to sway depending on your geographical location and economical position.
So what do you think the struggles Puerto Rico is going through right now, economically and domestically?
Basically, Puerto Rico at the moment has a lot of corruption.
Mm-hmm.
It has been brought on by both party majorities. They both want their own ideologies. They won't unite or have a coalition in any way. So once the other political party comes into power, they will destroy or remove any laws that were passed by the past government to make it so their ideologies will go forward. I believe it would be for the best interest of the people to stop worrying about the status and work for a better Puerto Rico, and then afterwards, when we have a better economic status, less unemployment, less violence, less problems with drugs, it would be more beneficial for the country as a whole.
I know you touched upon this before, but what is the future for Puerto Rico in your opinion?
I believe at the moment this referendum won't go any further. It will go into Congress, but it will probably not be approved. From there, it would be depending on where people want to unite for a common cause, or if they just want to keep going back and forth, improving the Commonwealth, and then decide either to stay as a Commonwealth or go forward independence or statehood.
So you mentioned before that culture was one of the reasons you preferred the independent state. Speak a little bit about the culture differences between Puerto Rico and the United States.
Well, Puerto Rico is in the Caribbean, and it has influence from the Atlantic as well. Puerto Rico was a colony of Spain for quite some time, so you have that Spanish influence as well. So there is a mix of the Aborigines, which were the Tainos, Spanish or European, and this weighs into it a lot, because since it's a Caribbean culture, you don't have the same traditions, same religious values, and same ideologies. Since it's in the Caribbean, it's always sunny, it's always a vivid, more happy, more warm kind of culture.
So from your experiences, Danny, how do you feel students in the United States feel about Puerto Rico, or what do they know about Puerto Rico relations with the United States?
I believe that most people don't have enough knowledge. Coming here, I would get asked questions like if it snowed, or how was the weather, or just, oh, I spent a vacation there, the people being cheery. It was mostly, since it's a vacational spot, people would just mention that, and it wasn't what you want to hear from your country. You would want to hear more about it.
Do you feel like they know enough about Puerto Rico to even say anything about it at all?
Honestly, most people were open to what I would have to say about Puerto Rico, since I felt that most people did not know or were misinformed. Commonwealth is basically a non-incorporated state. We are part of the U.S., but we aren't. When we are born in Puerto Rico, we become naturally American citizens. Although we can't vote for senators, representatives, or the president, we can vote for our own government, but we must abide by the Constitution and any laws passed by Congress or any rulings by the Supreme Court. When we go from Puerto Rico to the United States, we don't have to pass like customs. It is technically the United States. At the moment, Puerto Ricans can serve in the military, and they have for decades. This is largely unnoticed, or they become marginalized because they don't believe they are actual citizens. This is really something that is sad, because you have Puerto Ricans and Americans fighting out in different wars, and you don't see the recognition that should be have for these people that are going out and fighting for not just their way of life, but for their ideals and for America.
How do you think we can shift the perception of Puerto Rico in the United States, or Puerto Rico itself?
I think it all comes down to going out and not just doing your research, visiting the island, not just going to the tourist sites. My advice to anyone is just go to the tourist sites, enjoy your time there, but also see what the island has to offer, the culture, the music, the sights, and after that, build your own perception of what you see and what you hear.
Well, thank you very much for being here today, Danny. It's an interesting topic, and I hope in the future Puerto Rican relations with the United States obviously progress, and for the positive or for the good of the Puerto Rican and the United States people. I think it'll be interesting to see how the referendum moves forward from here. Thanks again. Thank you for tuning in, and please visit us at blogs.shu.edu/globalcurrent. I am Bilal Bahadur.
Namu Korba.
Have a great day.